objection.
Mr. President, I rise as a member of the Armed Services Committee to discuss the nomination of Pete Hegseth to be our nation's Secretary of Defense. Let me make two preliminary comments. First, my philosophy about voting on nominees is to give deference to the President, who has been elected, who has a mandate that carries with it a mandate to assemble a leadership team in executive positions. And so I always begin with any president, Democrat or Republican, with a beginning standpoint. They should be able to assemble a team unless there are significant challenges with a nominee. Second, I do want to say that as part of the work that I've done in examining this nominee, I did review his military record, and I express my respect for the military record. Pete Hegseth's service in the military, my review of those Pentagon records suggested that he served in a very honorable way, and I want to acknowledge that. And yet I rise to oppose the nomination and urge my colleagues to oppose it, or at least take the time to really understand the gravity of behavioral challenges that have been demonstrated by Mr. Hegseth during his career. I have multiple problems with this nominee for this position, and this position, Secretary of Defense, is the position that I view and many Virginians view as the most important cabinet post. Let me review the reasons for my opposition. First, Mr. Hegseth's record of erratic, unprofessional, and troubling behavior. Mr. Hegseth was married twice before he is married to his current wife, his third wife. And in the first two marriages, there were allegations in both of serious and multiple infidelities. I asked him at the hearing when he appeared before us whether he took an oath of fidelity to his spouses, and of course he did, in the same way that a Secretary of Defense will take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. But the evidence that was before us, the public record that was before us, is very, very troubling. In Mr. Hegseth's first marriage, there were public reports that he was unfaithful to his wife at least 5 different times with multiple other people. He never rebutted that, and because he wouldn't meet with members of the committee on the Democratic side, we didn't get a chance to talk about that in a closed setting, which would have been most important. In his second marriage, he was married, and while married, fathered a child by a woman who would become his third wife in August of 2017. So he was still married to wife number 2 and cheated on her with the woman who would bear his child and become wife number 3. But in a very shocking way to me, within 2 months after the birth of this child, he was at a Republican political event at a hotel in Monterey, California, and cheated on both his second wife and the mother of this newborn in an incident that led to a sexual assault criminal investigation. This behavior, look, people are people. People make mistakes. But a first marriage breaking up over serial infidelity and then a second marriage also bedeviled by serial infidelity is something that has to call up questions about an individual's judgment. Mr. Hegseth has been the leader of 2 nonprofit organizations that are veteran service organizations. In one of the organizations, Concerned Veterans for America, during the time he was the CEO, an employee of the organization wrote a scathing report about Mr. Hegseth creating a toxic work culture in this environment where impairment by alcohol was not only exhibited by him but tolerated in others, and where there was a significant creation of a toxic work environment for women employees. The committee members have had access to a report that was not done because he was nominated for Secretary of Defense. This was a report that was done by employees and given to the leaders of this organization at the time, now nearly 10 years ago, with about 35 names of employees and individuals in the organization with knowledge of the facts and recitation of event after event after event, where people were treated unfairly, women were made to feel that they were second class in the organization, and alcohol abuse was common in workplace events. I referenced a sexual assault claim in Monterey, and I will call it an undisclosed sexual assault claim because Mr. Hegseth never told the Trump transition team about this event when he was being considered and vetted to be Secretary of Defense. Again, he's married to wife 2. He's now fathered a child by a woman being unfaithful in that wedding, and within 2 months after fathering the child, he goes to an event in Monterey, California, gets a woman at the event into his hotel room, has sex with her. She claims she was drugged and raped and filed a criminal complaint about it with local law enforcement within days after the event. He admits the event. He says it was consensual, not a sexual assault or rape, consensual, but he acknowledges that it occurred. What then happened? The survivor went to local law enforcement, filed a sexual assault claim. The claim was investigated over a period of time. The prosecutor ultimately decided not to pursue criminal charges against Mr. Hegseth. But there was a civil claim as well that later led to a settlement with the victim, payment of cash to the victim, and the entrance into a non-disclosure agreement with the victim. None of this was disclosed to the Trump team as they were examining Mr. Hegseth to be Secretary of Defense. He didn't disclose the event. He didn't disclose the criminal sexual assault claim. He didn't disclose the fact of an investigation. He didn't disclose the civil claim. He didn't disclose the settlement. He didn't disclose the cash payment. He didn't disclose the non-disclosure agreement. He hid all of it from the Trump transition team, and when I asked him why, he didn't really have an answer, and I told him, I know the reason why. You were worried that if you told them about this, they would not nominate you to be Secretary of Defense. The relationship between a Secretary of Defense and a president is a very important relationship that demands complete candor. There's always some challenge. There's always something at the Pentagon that might be going wrong. Mr. Hegseth demonstrated at a very critical moment that he would not let the president-elect know about this fact because he wanted to advance himself, and he worried that if he was candid, it would cause problems for him. I don't want a Secretary of Defense who is unwilling to be candid with the Commander-in-Chief. And he's already demonstrated grave reason to doubt whether he will be candid by refusing to disclose the reality of this sexual assault allegation in Monterey. An affidavit was filed yesterday by one Danielle Hegseth, the former sister-in-law of the nominee, revealing publicly facts suggesting spousal abuse in Mr. Hegseth's second marriage. I don't know Danielle Hegseth. I haven't talked to her. I was not aware of that allegation, but it didn't surprise anyone on the committee who had reviewed the record. Why not? Because there are already facts in the record raising this very question. In fact, I asked Mr. Hegseth about it at the Armed Services Committee. During his second divorce, his own mother wrote him a letter saying, essentially, you are a serial abuser of women, including your own 2 wives, and you need to look in the mirror, get some help, and figure this out. His mother even used the phrase, neither X nor Y, the names of the first 2 wives, deserved the treatment they have received at your hand. All the committee members had access to that before the hearing. All of them. What an extraordinary letter. Your mother writing you a letter saying you're a serial abuser of women that needs to look in the mirror and get help, and saying that the 2 wives that you have abused do not deserve the treatment they have received at your hand. And so the allegation from Danielle Hegseth yesterday, reporting her observations of Mr. Hegseth's behavior and in particular abuse of her sister-in-law, have to be given some credence by this committee. And we have to avoid a rush that we may regret. I found it very unusual that when I asked Mr. Hegseth at the hearing, a sexual assault would be disqualifying to be Secretary of Defense, he would not agree with me. Spousal abuse would be disqualifying to be a Secretary of Defense, he would not agree with me. Being impaired by alcohol while on the job would be disqualifying to be Secretary of Defense, he would not agree with me. These are not hard questions. They are clearly disqualifying behaviors, and the fact that he would not agree that they were disqualifying behaviors suggested to me as I was watching that testimony that they evinced a little bit of a guilty conscience. Why would I want to agree if I have concerns about my own behavior? What has been Mr. Hegseth's response to allegations of infidelity demonstrating poor judgment, creation of a toxic work culture, alcohol impairment while at work, this undisclosed sexual assault claim, the allegations of spousal abuse? What has his response been? His response has been twofold. Complete denial. Complete denial, with the exception of acknowledging that, yes, he did cheat on his wife and the mother of a newborn child in Monterey, California in September 2017. He has denied everything else, even though the record is replete with specific instances at specific times with specific individuals attesting to these behaviors. His other defense is to claim that all of it, is an anonymous smear. An anonymous smear. Let me tell my colleagues, this is anything but anonymous. When your own mother writes you a letter saying you are a serial abuser of women, including your 2 wives, and they don't deserve the treatment they have received at your hand, that is not anonymous. The report of the whistleblower at the Concerned Veterans of America organization a decade ago, anything but anonymous. The report listed, I counted them, incidents involving 36 named individuals who had been either participating in, victimized by, witnessing, or aware of the incidents described in the document. This is not anonymous. Danielle Hegseth's public affidavit is not anonymous. The one thing that I will acknowledge that's in the anonymous space is this: the number of individuals who have come forward and shared with me and other members of the committee their own firsthand knowledge of similar events, but said, you can't use my name because I'm so afraid. I'm afraid of what Mr. Hegseth would do. I'm afraid of what the president might do. I had someone say to me when I said, you needn't be afraid, that's easy for you to say. That's easy for you to say. If the building, the U.S. Capitol where you work, could be attacked by people when it was well fortified and secured, what chance would I have if someone didn't like the fact that I publicly criticized this nominee? So yes, there are some who are speaking to us who are asking for anonymity, and that, if they've asked for it, they should be provided it. But there are many who have spoken either directly via affidavit or in records that are available to all committee members and all senators who are anything but anonymous. And I would urge my colleagues, and not just the Armed Services Committee members, to go and read the documents that are available to you before you cast your vote, set your feet in stone about a nominee. You should see these documents. I want to go back to one point that I made that I think is telling, and that is Mr. Hegseth's refusal to disclose these facts to the Trump transition team. I mean, it's one thing to not disclose them to the committee. It's one thing to refuse to meet with members of the committee. I'll get to that in a second. But when the President-elect, who's going to be the commander-in-chief, is vetting you for the most important cabinet position in the United States, and you know you have been charged with a sexual assault that led to a criminal investigation, a civil settlement, a cash payment, a non-disclosure agreement, and you choose not to reveal it to the president, in my view, that in and of itself should be disqualifying. The level of disrespect that shows for the president-elect, in my view, should be disqualifying. Let me conclude with a couple of other points. The main point is the pattern of behavior, which should make anyone wary to vote for Mr. Hegseth for Secretary of Defense. But a couple of other points I want to mention. Mr. Hegseth, I think, sort of set a very unfortunate precedent. I have been on the Armed Services Committee. I sit side by side with my colleague, Senator King, on that committee since we came to the Senate in January of 2013. I have now participated in confirmation hearings for about 5 Secretaries of Defense, both Democratic and Republican nominees. Mr. Hegseth is the only one that refused to meet with Democratic members of the committee, save for the chairman, Jack Reed. He met with the Republican committee members, but all of us were trying to set meetings with him, as has been our norm, so that we could talk to him about these issues and ask him questions privately in our office. Some of these matters are, frankly, probably better for private discussion than public discussion, but he stiff-armed every one of us except Jack Reed. Now, in some ways, maybe it's not a surprise. This is an individual who's written books and articles where he said Democrats are evil, Democrats are the adversary. But if you're nominated to be Secretary of Defense of the Pentagon, it's a non-political military. It's a civilian military that should not be politicized. And if you begin the job saying, I needn't even sit down and pay the respective meeting with Democratic senators, what about Democrats that serve in the military? Or independents, or libertarians, or people who don't share Mr. Hegseth's party affiliation? What does it say to the men and women who work for our military when he wouldn't even pay the respect paid by every predecessor that they would meet with senators of both parties before the hearing? I was very disturbed the other day when we had a committee hearing to forward Mr. Hegseth's nomination, and the Republican majority asked for a waiver to forward it faster than rules allow, and that waiver can be granted if the committee votes to do so. And one of my colleagues, Senator Warren, said to the Republicans, wait, you're asking us to waive normal rules? We don't want to waive normal rules to speed this along. He wouldn't even meet with us. I thought that was a pretty compelling argument. I understand if Mr. Hegseth has no respect for the senators in this body who are Democrats, that's one thing. But I would expect my Senate colleagues to have some respect for us. I've served with members of this committee on the Republican side. Some have been there the entire 12 years I've been there. I didn't think they would tolerate a nominee stiff-arming me. If there was a Democratic nominee for Secretary of Defense who refused to meet with Republican members of the committee, I would raise heck about that publicly in the committee and threaten to block the nominee until he met with the Republican members of the committee. I know Senator King would do the same thing. Democrats would do the same thing. We would not tolerate a nominee stiff-arming one side of the dais and refusing to meet with us. We wouldn't tolerate it. I was shocked that my Republican colleagues in a closed meeting 2 days ago demonstrated that they're just fine with that. This is my favorite committee in the Senate. We work very cooperatively in a bipartisan way, and that my Republican colleagues are perfectly fine with us being disrespected because we happen to be Democrats who our citizens elected us to serve in the United States Senate is very, very shocking to me. One other point that I want to bring up. I've revealed much material that is in the record and that other senators can view for themselves, but I have to say, in looking at the investigation record, which was compiled largely by the FBI, it was very, very weak. The FBI went out to do an investigation of Mr. Hegseth. The report was made available to the chair and the ranking member, not to the members of the committee. We haven't seen the report, but we have been able to ask questions of the chair and ranking about it. The allegations that I've walked through, which are largely public record, the FBI didn't even interview the wives. Even after a mother's letter had said that you were a serial abuser of women, including your 2 wives, the FBI did not even go out and interview the wives. Why not? I mean, was it an investigation or just like a box-checking exercise? A number of us, when we heard that, we sort of raised hell about it. Like, if you're going to do an investigation, talk to the people who know the nominee the best, and the 2 wives are people you ought to talk to. We embarrassed the FBI. And so after the fact, they went out and did a very cursory discussion with one of the wives. And again, I have not seen that material. I've not been allowed to see it. That should itself shock my colleagues and the public. But I have confirmed in speaking about it with the ranking and chair that the interview with the wife was very cursory, covered one set of topics, but left many of the questions that I've raised here completely unanswered and unaddressed. A nominee to be Secretary of the Defense is going to have enormous power over the physical safety of Americans and over peace, war, and diplomacy in the world. Aren't we as senators exercising our advise and consent role entitled to a background investigation that is meaningful, that is searching, that is comprehensive? Are we supposed to just be given some half-work product and say, okay, that's great, let's just rush to confirm somebody? We shouldn't be confirming a person on an insufficient background check if they didn't have all of these acknowledged problems that are part of the public record. But when they are part of the public record, when the FBI finds out that, wow, you didn't tell the transition team about the sexual assault claim, the investigation should be thorough, not mediocre and cursory. And so, Mr. President, I'm going to conclude and just say this may not be the last time I appear on the floor to speak on this nomination. But for now, my request of my colleagues is a simple one. Why rush? Why rush? Why would we rush to put through a nomination for a position of this importance that is freighted with so much baggage and so much evidence of glaring character and judgment errors? Do we want to have egg on our face? Do we want to rush and have this blow up later? Do we want to rush and then have other witnesses come out as Danielle Hegseth did yesterday? Is that what the Senate's advise and consent process, mandated by the Constitution for a very important reason, has come to? Cursory investigation that doesn't get to the underlying facts, even when they're sitting right out there before us, and we're going to rush to confirm someone? For what reason? And so, Mr. President, as I sit down, I'll just conclude with that question. Why rush this? Let's take the time, and when we cast a vote on confirmation, cast it with the confidence that we have complete information about the man who's been nominated to be our Secretary of Defense. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also-Brooks.